They told me I was insane. That was the word they used right there in the sterile, air-conditioned boardroom of the salvage company. My boss, a man I'd pulled from a kelp-tangled wreck myself 2 years prior, couldn't even look at me. He just stared at the polished mahogany table and said it. Mara, the official report cites nitrogen narcosis. You were hallucinating. I remember the feeling, the cold seeping into my bones, colder than the 400 feet of black water I just ascended from. I remember seeing my own brother, Mark, standing by the door, his face a mask of pity and shame. He was the one who'd driven me here from the hospital. He'd already heard the story. Voices calling from the skeletal remains of the Odessa, a freighter that went down in a squall 60 years ago. Whispers that weren't in my comms, but in the water itself, in the pressure, in the very marrow of my bones. They promised me things. They told me secrets of the deep. They tried to get me to open my helmet. It wasn't narcosis, I whispered, my throat raw. It was the bell. I could hear it ringing. My boss finally looked up, his eyes empty. The bell was secured and brought to the surface 2 days before your dive, Mara. It's in a warehouse in Norfolk. You're fired. Get some help. That was the beginning of my exile. My family held an intervention. Not out of love, but out of embarrassment. My father, a man who measured life in stock prices and respectable job titles, called my obsession a stain on our name. My mother wept, begging me to see a therapist, to forget the morbid fantasies of the sea. Mark, my own brother, was the worst. He just looked at me with that same look from the boardroom. The look you give a sick animal you know you can't save. A diver who hears things, he'd said, a bitter little laugh escaping his lips. You're a liability, Mara. You're a joke. They didn't understand. The dismissal wasn't just about a job. It was an invalidation of my reality. They were trying to gaslight me into believing the sea, the only place I'd ever felt whole, had tried to kill me with madness. But I knew what I heard, so I left. I sold my car, cashed out my meager 401k, and disappeared into the coastal towns of the North Atlantic, the places where sea salt and superstition are the same thing. My focus narrowed to a singular, all-consuming point: the bells. Not just any shipwreck bells, but the cursed ones. The ones from ships that went down with all hands under strange circumstances. The siren's gown, the iron albatross, the cantor's folly. I chased folklore, bribed old fishermen for their grandfathers' journals, and learned to read sonar charts like they were scripture. They all said the same thing. The bells don't just mark the dead. They call to them. And sometimes they call to the living, too. I spent 5 years in that self-imposed exile. 5 years of ridicule from the academic community, of being laughed out of maritime museums, of living on canned tuna, and the burning, obsessive need to prove I wasn't crazy. I dove alone, on a shoestring budget, with equipment that was barely seaworthy. I recorded hours of hydrophone audio near these wrecks, capturing the groans of dying metal, the songs of whales, and something else, a low, resonant hum, a frequency that felt pining, sentient. My breakthrough came at the wreck of the Cantor's Folly. It was a brutal dive, a descent into crushing, ink-black silence. But the silence wasn't empty. The whispers were there, waiting for me. This time, I was ready. I wasn't a salvage diver anymore. I was a researcher. I had my gear, my instruments. I found the bell, still chained to its belfry, coated in a strange, phosphorescent algae that pulsed with the hum. And as I documented it, I realized the truth. It wasn't ghosts. It was physics. A unique bronze alloy combined with decades of immense pressure and specific microbial colonies had turned the bell into a massive psychoacoustic resonator. It reacted to the subtle frequencies of the human brain. amplifying and broadcasting latent thoughts, fears, and memories, the psychic echoes of the dying crew back into the water and into the minds of anyone sensitive enough to hear it. It didn't summon the dead. It turned the living into amplifiers for their final terrified moments. I published my findings, not in some paranormal tabloid, but in the Journal of Applied Acoustics and Maritime Archaeology. I had data, I had recordings, I had physical samples of the alloy and the algae. I called the field echoarchaeology. At first, they called me a crank. Then a team from Woods Hole replicated my findings on a different bell. Then another. Suddenly, I wasn't crazy Mara anymore. I was Dr. Cade, the pioneer of a terrifying new science, the woman who mapped the places where the ocean holds on to its ghosts. Which is why, 6 years after my exile, I was back home. Not for a holiday, but for a family dinner. A command performance. My father had been boasting to his golf partners about his brilliant trailblazing daughter. My mother wanted to show me off to the neighbors. Mark was there, looking older, softer. They were all so proud, so eager to pretend the last few years had never happened. We always knew you'd do something incredible, Mara. My father beamed, raising a glass of wine. The lie was so thick I could taste it. After dinner, as they were laughing about some triviality, I quietly said, "I brought something to show you." I went to my car and returned with a heavy lead-lined case. Inside, nestled in acoustic foam, was a shard. A piece of the bell from the Cantor's Folly I'd been authorized to keep for research. I placed it on the coffee table. "You never believed me," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You thought I was broken. I want you to understand what I survived." Mark scoffed. "Mara, come on. It's just a piece of metal." "Is it?" I took a small, specialized transducer from my bag and attached it to the shard. I switched it on. It emitted a low, inaudible frequency, matching the one I'd recorded in the deep. For a second, nothing happened. Then the wine in my father's glass began to tremble. The air grew heavy, cold. A low whisper slithered out of the silence, a sound that wasn't a sound at all, but a pressure inside their skulls. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. "What is that? What do you hear?" I asked, my voice the only calm thing in the room. My father's face went white. He was staring at the empty armchair in the corner, the one my grandfather died in 20 years ago. He's asking why I sold the house," he stammered, his voice cracking. Mark stumbled back, clutching his head. "Make it stop," he hissed, his gaze darting around the room. "They're talking about the accident from college. No one knows about that. No one." The whispers grew louder, weaving through the room like smoke. They weren't the echoes of drowned sailors anymore. They were the family's own ghosts, their own buried secrets, their deepest shames and regrets. Plucked from their minds and played back to them in a horrifying chorus. This was the bell's trick. It found the darkness you carried inside you and gave it a voice. I looked at their crumbling faces, their self-assured worlds collapsing in on them. They were finally hearing the song that had haunted my every waking moment for years. They were feeling just a fraction of the weight I had carried alone. I reached out and switched off the transducer. Silence. Heavy, absolute, and terrifying. My father was openly weeping. My mother was curled into a ball on the sofa. Mark was staring at me, his face a ruin of fear and, for the first time, a dawning, horrified respect. "The voices," I said, my voice soft but unbreakable. "They don't go away. You just learn to live with the haunting." I picked up the shard and placed it back in its case. I had my proof. I had my triumph. But there was no joy in it. Only a vast, cold calm. I was no longer the girl they had cast out. I was a survivor of a world they couldn't even imagine, a master of the echoes that had merely destroyed me. I left them there, in the wreckage of their comfortable lives, silenced by the truth they had once so casually dismissed. The line between me and the summoned had indeed grown thin, but I had chosen my side.